In June 2011, inside a California office, a media empire finalized a surrender. News Corp quietly sold Myspace for just $35 million. 6 years earlier, they had purchased the platform for $580 million. At its peak, it was the undisputed cultural center of the American internet, commanding more web traffic in the United States than Google. It held the digital identities, indie music scenes, and social hierarchies of an entire generation. But by 2011, it was a digital ghost town. The servers were still running, drawing power in cold data centers, but the users had vanished. The custom HTML backgrounds were broken. The auto-playing music players sat silent. The empire had not been destroyed by a server crash. It had been abandoned. But the real story of Myspace is not only the story of a corporate fire sale. It is the story of how America first learned to build a digital identity and what happens when the architecture of a social ecosystem collapses under its own weight. Every week, we tell the stories of American devices, platforms, software, stores, and digital screens that once taught the country what the future felt like and what happened when the market moved on. Subscribe if that history matters to you. The story of Myspace begins not with nostalgia, but with a specific place, in a Southern California office in 2003. In the summer of 2003, the American internet was in a state of awkward transition, the wild, anonymous frontier of the 1990s, defined by AOL chat rooms, slow dial-up modems, and disposable screen names, was beginning to mature. Silicon Valley investors were looking for the next phase of the web, a concept that would eventually demand real names, verified identities, and clean, orderly databases. The first company to successfully map this new reality was Friendster. Launched in 2002, Friendster introduced millions of Americans to the concept of a modern social network, an online platform built around personal profiles, public connections, and a shared digital identity. It was a massive cultural hit, but it was designed with rigid rules. Friendster's management wanted a pristine, professional digital environment. When users began creating profiles for indie rock bands, inside jokes, pets, and fictional characters, Friendster cracked down. They labeled these accounts fakesters and aggressively deleted them. The platform was effectively telling its users how they were allowed to exist online. That friction created a sudden void in the market. In Santa Monica, California, inside an internet marketing company called eUniverse, a small team recognized the growing user frustration. Chris DeWolf and Tom Anderson saw that Friendster was actively turning away its most creative and energetic users. eUniverse was not a prestigious Silicon Valley startup. It was a gritty digital marketing firm that specialized in email lists, e-commerce, and driving web traffic. But they had the server resources to build a clone quickly. In August 2003, they launched Myspace. The early architecture of Myspace was not a marvel of software engineering. It was built rapidly using Cold Fusion, a web programming language that would later struggle severely under the weight of massive scale. But what Myspace lacked in elegant code, it made up for in its fundamental philosophy. It did not care who you were. When an American teenager registered for Myspace, they were not forced to use their legal name. They could be a local garage band, a pseudonym, a skate club, or a purely fictional persona. And every time a new user signed up, they were automatically greeted by the platform's co-founder, whose smiling profile picture, a grainy photo of a guy in a white t-shirt looking back over his shoulder, would become one of the most recognizable images in American digital history. Tom Anderson was everybody's first friend. This small design choice, giving every new user an immediate connection rather than an empty dashboard, jump-started the network. Furthermore, eUniverse did not have to wait for organic growth. The company already possessed a massive database of millions of email addresses gathered from their network of entertainment websites and gaming portals. They sent a promotional blast to their existing subscribers, seeding the new network with thousands of users almost overnight. The first major crack in Friendster's dominance, and MySpace's first true American breakthrough, came from the Los Angeles music scene. At the time, independent bands had very few ways to distribute their music online without a major record label. Building a custom website was expensive, and hosting heavy audio files required significant server costs. MySpace offered a brilliant solution. They built a dedicated music player directly into the platform, allowing bands to upload MP3s that users could stream instantly. Almost overnight, local California bands migrated to MySpace, and where the bands went, the fans followed. The platform became a digital club scene, a place where users could discover new music, check tour dates, and interact directly with artists without a corporate middleman. By early 2004, the gravity of the network was no longer just about connecting with people you already knew in real life. It was about discovering a cultural scene you wanted to be part of. As 2004 progressed, the network effects, the pattern where a service becomes more valuable as more people use it, began to sweep through American high schools and college campuses. In computer labs, university dorms, and public libraries from Ohio to Texas, the blue and white login screen became a daily destination. Friendster had been a place for adults in major cities to network. MySpace became the undisputed digital hallway for American youth. But the most defining feature of MySpace was entirely accidental. In the early days, the platform's developers failed to properly restrict the text fields on user profile pages. They left a security loophole that allowed users to input custom HTML, the standard markup language used to display web pages, directly into their About Me sections. Instead of patching the vulnerability and forcing users back into a uniform template, MySpace left it open. That single decision changed the trajectory of the American internet. Suddenly, users realized they did not have to accept the sterile blue and white default layout of the website. They could alter the code to change the background color, the font size, the cursor shape, and the layout of their photos. They could embed sparkling graphics, scrolling marquees, and most importantly, an auto-playing music widget. This was not merely a software feature, it was a digital revelation. In suburban bedrooms across the United States, teenagers who had no prior interest in computer science were suddenly spending hours writing, copying, and debugging raw code. A thriving cottage industry of third-party websites emerged, offering copy-and-paste code snippets specifically for MySpace layouts. Users learned how to manipulate the architecture of the web simply because they wanted their profile to look perfectly, aggressively unique. By late 2004, logging into MySpace meant stepping into a chaotic, loud, and hyper-personalized digital environment. A teenager would sit in front of a heavy CRT monitor, listening to the hum of a beige desktop tower, waiting for a profile page to render over a slow broadband connection. When the page finally loaded, it might feature a pitch-black background, neon pink text, a shower of digital glitter, and a blaring post-hardcore punk track that could not be paused. It was cluttered, it was ugly to traditional web designers, and it was undeniably human. The platform was growing at a staggering rate, pulling in millions of registrations and pushing the physical servers sitting in California data centers to their absolute limits. eUniverse had built a marketing tool, but the users had transformed it into a cultural necessity. The code was messy and the servers were struggling, but the platform had just unlocked the most powerful force on the early web: the ability for an American teenager to build a digital room of their own. By 2005, MySpace had transitioned from a popular Southern California website into a fundamental piece of American infrastructure. It was no longer just a place to post photos. It was the mechanism through which popular culture was distributed. Independent bands were suddenly booking national tours and selling out venues based entirely on their MySpace follower counts, bypassing traditional record labels and radio stations. Comedians and artists used the platform to build direct relationships with millions of fans. For American youth, If a band, a brand, or a person did not have a MySpace page, they effectively did not exist. The sheer volume of American traffic moving through the network had grown too massive to ignore. Traditional media giants recognized that they were losing the attention of an entire generation, and they wanted it back. In July 2005, Viacom, the corporate parent of MTV, attempted to purchase the platform, but they were outbid by an unexpected buyer. Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, a traditional newspaper and television conglomerate, purchased MySpace for $580 million. At the time, the acquisition was viewed as a seismic validation of the Internet's new era. News Corp believed they were buying the digital equivalent of a global television network. They saw millions of users, billions of page views, and an infinite canvas for advertising. But what News Corp actually bought was a highly delicate social ecosystem held together by raw adolescent tension. The true breakthrough of MySpace, the feature that transformed it from a mere website into a daily psychological necessity, was a deceptively simple interface element known as the Top 8. By default, every user's profile displayed a grid of their 8 closest friends. This was not a passive private list. It was a digital social hierarchy, a highly public, mathematically constrained ranking of personal allegiances. In an American high school in 2005, the Top 8 was a tool of immense social power. It was a weapon, a reward, and a constant source of anxiety. If a student had an argument with a friend in the cafeteria, that friend could be swiftly demoted from the number 2 spot and pushed off the grid entirely by the time the school day ended. This system created intense, localized network effects. Users were forced to log in every single day, not just to discover new music, but to monitor their own social standing. They were actively managing their digital survival. Furthermore, the platform required constant manual navigation. There was no automated algorithm delivering updates to a central homepage. To see if a friend had updated their layout, uploaded a new photo, or changed their top 8, a user had to click directly to that person's page. This constant, obsessive clicking, this digital profile hunting, generated billions of page views, making the platform look incredibly lucrative on paper. But the underlying architecture, the actual code supporting this massive ecosystem, was dangerously fragile. The same freedom that allowed users to inject custom code into their profiles also made the platform fundamentally insecure. In October 2005, just months after the News Corp acquisition, this fragility was exposed on a historic scale. A user named Sammy Kamkar realized he could exploit a vulnerability in the way MySpace processed profile text. He discovered a cross-site scripting flaw, a security gap that allowed unauthorized code to execute automatically whenever someone viewed a specific web page. Kamkar wrote a script and placed it hidden inside his own profile. When an American user clicked on Kamkar's page, the code executed silently in the background of their browser. It forced the viewer's account to automatically add Kamkar as a friend. It appended the phrase, "But most of all, Sammy is my hero," to their profile. And most importantly, it copied the hidden malicious code onto their page, turning the new victim into a carrier. Anyone who viewed the newly infected profile would immediately catch the virus as well. The incident demonstrated the terrifying interconnected scale of the MySpace ecosystem. Within 20 hours, over 1 million American profiles had been infected. The virus was spreading exponentially, crippling the servers. MySpace engineers were forced to take the entire network offline, shutting down the platform completely to rewrite the code and purge the worm from the system. The Sammy worm did not destroy MySpace. In fact, for many users, the temporary shutdown only highlighted how dependent they had become on the platform for their daily communication. But it served as a glaring, structural warning. It proved that the network was more viral and more technically precarious than its new corporate owners realized. The platform had reached the absolute center of American pop culture. But surviving at the center would require an engineering discipline the company did not yet have. By mid-2006, MySpace was no longer just a popular website. It was the gravitational center of the American Internet. In July of that year, the platform achieved a milestone that seemed almost impossible. It surpassed Google and Yahoo to become the most visited web domain in the United States. For a brief, shining window in American tech history, the most important place on the Internet was not a search engine or a corporate news portal. It was a chaotic, neon-drenched network of teenager-designed profile pages. The scale of the platform was fundamentally reshaping American culture, starting with the music industry. Before MySpace, independent artists in cities like Austin, Texas, or Portland, Oregon, had to press physical CDs, hand out flyers outside local clubs, and hope a record label scout happened to be in the crowd. The platform obliterated that bottleneck. A band could record a track in a garage, upload it as an MP3, a compressed audio format that made digital music sharing feasible over standard internet connections, and place it directly into the built-in media player on their profile. If the song resonated, users would add the track to their own pages. Suddenly, a band from a small town in Ohio could have their music auto-playing in hundreds of thousands of bedrooms across the country. Entire musical genres, most notably scene and emo pop punk, exploded out of the platform. Artists like Panic! At the Disco, Sean Kingston and Colby Kaya built massive, devoted fan bases entirely through their MySpace presence, forcing major record labels in Los Angeles to desperately scramble to sign acts that the Internet had already crowned. The platform had effectively replaced the radio station and the local record store in a single stroke. But the platform's influence extended far beyond music. It established the visual language of the early social web. Because the smartphone had not yet absorbed the camera, capturing an image required a dedicated digital camera, a standalone plastic device that saved photos to a memory card. American teenagers adopted a specific ritual, holding a cheap point-and-shoot camera high above their heads in a bathroom mirror, firing the harsh flash, and then plugging the camera into a desktop computer via a heavy USB cable to upload the image. This high-angle MySpace mirror selfie became the defining aesthetic of a generation. In an American suburban bedroom in 2007, the desktop monitor did not merely display a website. It held a carefully curated digital identity, complete with a chosen soundtrack, a ranked list of allegiances, and a flashing HTML background that told the world exactly who you were before you even typed a word. To log off was to disappear. To lose your spot in a friend's top 8 was an immediate social crisis that bled into the school hallways the next morning. To find the perfect song for your profile required hours of meticulous curation. The platform was demanding, immersive, and inescapable. By 2007, the network was registering hundreds of thousands of new users every single day. It was not just a tool for communication. It was a digital destination where American youth effectively lived their lives after the school bell rang. This unprecedented attention caught the eye of the wider tech industry, which was desperately trying to monetize the rapidly growing Web 2.0 era. In August 2006, Google made a monumental validation of the platform's power. They signed a staggering 3-year, $900 million agreement to be the exclusive search provider and text-based advertising network for MySpace. For News Corp, this deal was an absolute triumph. It effectively paid back the entire $580 million purchase price of the platform in a single stroke just a year after the acquisition. By 2008, MySpace boasted over 115 million global users, with the vast majority concentrated in the United States. It had dedicated corporate offices, a massive staff, and an undisputed monopoly on youth culture. The aesthetic of the website bled deeply into the physical world. In American shopping malls, retail chains like Hot Topic sold merchandise directly tied to the bands and cultural trends that were dominating the MySpace charts. Every major movie studio, clothing retailer, and consumer brand in America poured advertising dollars into the site, desperate to reach a demographic that had stopped watching traditional television. The empire had reached its absolute zenith, standing as the most valuable, heavily trafficked piece of real estate on the internet. By 2007, the platform's influence had expanded far beyond suburban bedrooms and local music venues. It had become a mandatory pillar of American public life, forcing institutions that previously ignored the internet to adapt to its rules. This shift was most visible during the lead-up to the 2008 United States presidential election. For the first time in American history, political campaigns realized that they could not simply rely on television commercials and physical mailers. They needed a digital identity. Political staffers in Washington, D.C., and campaign offices across the country found themselves tasked with managing their candidates' MySpace profiles. They uploaded policy platforms, curated friend lists, and carefully managed their top 8 to include allied politicians and key demographic representatives. The concept of an American voter friending a presidential candidate and displaying that allegiance publicly on their own profile was entirely novel. The platform had essentially become a nationwide digital town square where pop culture, personal identity, and national politics collided on the same chaotic interface. Beneath this cultural dominance, however, a massive and highly unregulated secondary industry was booming. Because MySpace allowed users to inject raw HTML code into their profiles, third-party developers realized they could build tools for the platform without needing official permission. This birthed the widget economy. A widget, a small, self-contained piece of software that can be embedded into a larger web page, Myspace, allowed users to add complex features to their profiles without knowing how to code. Companies like Slide and RockU built empires simply by offering MySpace users copy and paste codes for photo slideshows, virtual pets, custom cursors, and animated glitter text. If an American teenager wanted their profile name to sparkle in neon green, they did not wait for MySpace to build that feature. They went to a third-party website, copied a string of code, and pasted it directly into their About Me section. This created a fiercely loyal user base because the platform felt infinitely customizable, but it also turned the average profile into a staggering technical burden. To understand the scale of the empire at its peak, one had to look away from the computer screen and look at the physical reality of the American data center. A data center, a massive, climate-controlled building filled with thousands of servers and networking equipment, is the physical body of the cloud. By 2008, MySpace was straining its physical infrastructure to the breaking point. The original codebase, written hastily in Cold Fusion just a few years earlier, was never designed to handle a nation's worth of traffic. Inside the company, engineers referred to it as spaghetti code, a tangled, patched-together mess of software architecture that was incredibly difficult to update without breaking the entire site. Every time a user logged in, the servers had to pull their profile data, load their specific background image, fetch their chosen MP3 file, execute the third-party widget codes, and load their top 8 network. Now multiply that action by tens of millions of active users, all logging on simultaneously after the American school day ended. The servers located in Los Angeles data centers were consuming massive amounts of electricity, generating immense physical heat. The infrastructure was buckling under the weight of the platform's own success. Adding to this immense server strain was the pressure from the corporate ownership. News Corp had promised its shareholders that the $580 million acquisition and the subsequent $900 million advertising deal with Google would generate unprecedented revenue. To meet those aggressive financial targets, The platform's management had to monetize every available pixel of screen space. They began plastering user profiles with heavy, intrusive banner ads. A user logging in from a family computer desk would suddenly find their carefully curated digital room surrounded by flashing advertisements for weight loss pills, cheap car insurance, and downloadable cell phone ringtones. Because the platform did not have a sophisticated algorithm to target these ads smoothly, they were bluntly forced onto the pages, conflicting with the custom HTML and making the website agonizingly slow to load over standard American broadband connections. Yet, inside the corporate offices, the executives felt untouchable. The user counts were still rising. The cultural relevance was absolute. Myspace had successfully taught America how to live publicly online, proving that a digital ecosystem could hold just as much gravity as the physical world. The numbers looked invincible, but underneath the flashing backgrounds and auto-playing music, the architecture of the network was beginning to fracture. The first sign of the empire's collapse was not a massive server crash or a sudden user boycott. It was a subtle daily frustration in American homes, the slow, agonizing load time of a profile page. By late 2007, an American user sitting at a family computer would click on a friend's page and simply wait. The browser would freeze as the desktop computer tried to render a heavy HTML background, fetch an auto-playing MP3 from a struggling server, load 6 different third-party widgets, and process multiple aggressive banner ads. The platform had become physically exhausting to use. Older Windows XP machines, still common in American households and school libraries, simply lacked the processing power to handle the chaotic, unoptimized code of a popular profile. This clutter was not accidental. It was a structural mandate from corporate management. News Corp had to prove to Wall Street that its $580 million acquisition and the subsequent $900 million Google search deal were justified. Their solution was brute force monetization. They treated the platform like a digital billboard, squeezing maximum ad inventory onto every available pixel of screen space. They prioritized short-term revenue over long-term software engineering. While the user base was still technically growing, the actual experience of navigating the ecosystem was deteriorating rapidly. The platform was no longer serving the user. The user was serving the platform's advertising metrics. Because MySpace allowed users to operate under pseudonyms and left its code open, the network also became a haven for automated spam. A teenager would log in to find a dozen friend requests from fake, highly sexualized accounts pushing malicious links or sketchy promotional products. The platform felt increasingly unsafe, cluttered, and abandoned by its own moderators. At the exact moment MySpace was becoming heavier and harder to navigate, a radically different alternative was expanding across the country. Facebook had launched in 2004, but for its first 2 years, it was rigidly locked to university email addresses. It was exclusive, quiet, and most importantly, clean. When Facebook finally opened registration to the general American public in September 2006, it offered a stark contrast to the chaotic neon environment of MySpace. Facebook did not allow custom HTML. Users could not change the background color. They could not upload an auto-playing song. They could not embed a glittering widget. The interface was uniformly blue, white, and strictly organized. Facebook also fundamentally changed the rules of online identity. MySpace was built on the pseudonym, the freedom to be whoever you wanted, or to separate your digital life from your physical reality. Facebook demanded your legal name. Initially, American users resisted this idea, accustomed to the protective anonymity of the early web. But as real-life networks, co-workers, family members, and high school classmates migrated to the new platform, real names became a necessity for finding people. The wild, untamed digital bedroom of MySpace began to look childish, compared to the verified, organized directory of Facebook. But the killing blow, the true architectural shift that doomed the MySpace empire, was not about aesthetics or real names. It was a fundamental change in how Americans consumed the internet. It was the introduction of the newsfeed. On MySpace, digital socialization required active labor. If an American teenager wanted to know what their friends were doing, they had to actively click on individual profiles, hunting for new photos, checking the top 8 for drama, or reading updated status messages. It was a destination model. The user had to travel to the information. Facebook's newsfeed, introduced in late 2006, inverted this dynamic entirely. Instead of forcing the user to find the content, the algorithm brought the content directly to the center of the screen. A user simply logged in and scrolled down an infinitely updating river of information. Every photo upload, relationship change, and status update from their entire network was aggregated into one frictionless column. This was convenience displacement at its most lethal. The American user did not necessarily want to abandon their custom-built digital rooms, but the sheer, effortless convenience of a centralized algorithmic feed was impossible to resist. The daily habit of profile hunting was broken forever. The users were still technically logging into MySpace, but the gravity of the network was shifting. The American internet was about to trade the messy freedom of ownership for the frictionless comfort of the feed. Network effects, the pattern where a service becomes more valuable as more people use it, work in both directions. When an American teenager's friends migrated to Facebook, the value of their MySpace account dropped instantly. There was no longer a social penalty for leaving. Instead, there was a sudden, massive penalty for staying. If a user did not have a Facebook account by 2009, they were excluded from the daily flow of American high school and college life. The digital gravity had completely reversed. Inside the corporate offices, News Corp realized they were losing the war. But they fundamentally misdiagnosed the problem. Management believed they were fighting a feature battle. If Facebook had a cleaner interface, MySpace would simply launch a redesign. If Facebook had a new messaging system, MySpace would build a competitor. But they were trying to build these new features on top of an archaic, crumbling software foundation. The underlying code was still the same tangled web of cold fusion that had been rushed to market in 2003. Instead of rebuilding the platform from scratch, MySpace rolled out a series of confusing, half-measured redesigns. They attempted to clean up the user profiles by restricting custom HTML, the very feature that had made the platform culturally dominant in the first place. But they did this years too late. By stripping away the chaotic customization, they did not make the site feel like Facebook. They simply made it feel like a broken corporate imitation of itself. The American user was left with a platform that was neither uniquely their own nor efficiently algorithmic. The developer ecosystem sensed the collapse and immediately began to jump ship. Third-party companies that had built their fortunes providing widgets for MySpace realized that Facebook's application programming interface, its API, a controlled way for software systems to communicate, was far superior and significantly more stable. Developers abandoned the flashing cursors of MySpace to build massive, highly lucrative social games, like Farmville, directly into the Facebook ecosystem. The entertainment had moved. Even the platform's greatest defensive moat, its dominance over the American independent music scene, was evaporating. In the mid-2000s, MySpace was the only reliable place to host and stream an MP3 for free, but the internet had evolved. YouTube, acquired by Google, had become the default infrastructure for digital video and audio. A band no longer needed a MySpace profile to share a new song. They simply uploaded a video to YouTube and pasted the link onto their Facebook feed. The link would automatically generate a clean, playable video right in the middle of the screen. The necessity of the Myspace music player, once the beating heart of the platform, was erased by a simple web integration. By 2009, the internal metrics at News Corp painted a disastrous picture. The unique visitor counts were still technically high, but the engagement time was plummeting. An American user might log in once a month just to check an old message, but they were no longer spending hours curating their top 8 or searching for new bands. The daily habit was broken. In May 2009, Facebook officially surpassed MySpace in unique United States visitors. It was a crossing of the graphs that the platform would never recover from. Panic set in. The company cycled through a revolving door of chief executives, each promising to pivot the brand. They tried to rebrand the network as a dedicated social entertainment destination, explicitly surrendering the personal networking space to Facebook. They redesigned the logo, dropping the word "space" for a symbol of a bracket with a blank line. It was a desperate attempt to signify a new beginning. Instead, it only highlighted the void where the culture used to be. The American tech market is ruthlessly efficient when a platform loses its utility. The massive advertising deals began to dry up. Google, having recognized that the traffic was largely composed of inactive accounts and spam bots, did not renew its massive $900 million search pact at the same valuation. News Corp, bleeding money and desperate to cut its losses, began laying off hundreds of employees in its California offices. By 2011, the ecosystem was completely hollowed out. A user logging into an old account would find a digital graveyard. The friends list was filled with default avatars. The custom backgrounds failed to load because the third-party image hosting sites that stored them had gone bankrupt. The network was nothing more than a heavy, broken archive of a vanished era. In June 2011, News Corp finally surrendered. They sold the company they had purchased for $580 million to an advertising network called Specific Media, backed by pop star Justin Timberlake, for a catastrophic $35 million. It was one of the most stunning destruction of digital value in American corporate history. The pivot failed. The interface broke. The developers left. The users moved. The feed won. The culture vanished. The servers stayed on. The empire was gone. After the historic collapse and the $35 million fire sale in 2011, the new ownership group, led by the advertising network Specific Media and pop star Justin Timberlake, attempted to completely reinvent the brand. They abandoned the concept of a personal social network entirely. Recognizing they could not fight the algorithmic dominance of the Facebook newsfeed, they tried to rebuild MySpace as a sleek, horizontal discovery platform for music and entertainment. They stripped away the messy, user-generated HTML. They removed the flashing backgrounds and the chaotic custom cursors. They tried to create a premium, frictionless environment that looked more like a modern digital magazine or an early version of a streaming service. The transition was jarring. American users who logged in expecting the chaotic warmth of their old profiles were met with cold, gray layouts that functioned more like a promotional billboard than a personal diary. The brand stayed on the URL. The company behind it was no longer the same. The American public did not need a fragmented, difficult-to-navigate version of Spotify or Apple Music. The pivot failed rapidly because it fundamentally misunderstood what had made the network valuable in the first place. American teenagers had not come to the platform just to consume corporate media. They had come to build a digital room of their own. By removing the code, the company removed the soul of the product. For years after the pivot failed, the old version of the site sat in the background, acting as a massive, unintended archive of early 21st century American youth culture. Millions of users had long since migrated to new apps, but they left their high school photos, blog posts, and most importantly, their original music stored on those aging servers. Then in early 2019, a small, unassuming banner appeared at the top of the website. The company announced that as a result of a server migration project, any photo, video, or audio file uploaded more than 3 years prior might no longer be available. It was a catastrophic understatement. During a botched data transfer, the company permanently deleted over 50 million original songs uploaded by 14 million artists between 2003 and 2015. There was no backup. This was not merely a technical error. It was the burning of a digital library of Alexandria. Entire eras of American independent music, rough acoustic tracks recorded in garages in Seattle, punk anthems from dorm rooms in Austin, and experimental beats from basements in New Jersey were wiped from existence in an instant. For many local bands who had never pressed physical CDs, never secured a record deal, and trusted the platform as their sole distribution method, their entire creative history simply evaporated. The 2019 server wipe proved the terrifying reality of the modern cloud ecosystem. When a user uploads their digital life to a corporate server, they are trading ownership for convenience. And when that corporation no longer sees financial value in maintaining the heavy infrastructure to preserve that data, the history is quietly, permanently erased. The legacy of MySpace is not simply a wave of millennial nostalgia. A broken MySpace layout, preserved by archivists or remembered in old screenshots, is a physical argument about how the American internet used to function before algorithms took complete control. Today, an American user logging into a modern social network does not build anything. They are handed a pristine, rigid, uniform feed. They are essentially renting a standardized cubicle inside a massive corporate data center, scrolling mindlessly through content chosen by a machine learning algorithm designed to maximize engagement and serve advertisements. MySpace represented the absolute peak of the hand-built web. It was chaotic, loud, visually abrasive, and frequently broken. But it required active, human participation. The friction of the old platform was actually its greatest feature. Because nothing was automated, every connection, every song choice, and every pixel of background color was a deliberate human choice. It forced a generation of American teenagers to learn basic software coding just to express themselves. It required them to actively navigate a network, to curate their own soundtracks, and to make public high-stakes decisions about their digital social hierarchy through the top 8. It was a platform where the user was still the architect of their own digital identity rather than a passive consumer of an endless feed. Today, preservation communities and digital archivists spend countless hours scouring old desktop hard drives, thrift store laptops, and web crawls, desperately trying to recover fragments of the lost music and the customized layouts. Projects like the MySpace Dragon Horde on the Internet Archive managed to rescue roughly 450,000 songs, less than 1% of what was destroyed. These collectors recognized that what vanished was not just a defunct tech company, but the raw, unpolished sound of America figuring out how to live online. Somewhere on the Internet Archive, an old 2006 profile page still loads in silence on a modern screen, its custom HTML background fractured and broken, the top 8 links leading to dead pages, and a tiny embedded media player forever frozen on a song that the servers can no longer find. See you in the next video.